Thanks for joining us today to another Central Elevation webinar. I am your host, Nando Mogollon, and today we will be covering a few topics over cross-disciplines coordination. Now, on our previous webinar, we were talking about some of the features in order to track changes across multiple versions of different IFC files or incoming IFC files. So, having been covered that point, the next step in the process will be assuming that you will be playing the role of a coordinator as well. You will be receiving certain files, and you want to compare those multiple disciplines files, structural, electrical, plumbing, etc., with your own architectural file. Finding the problems, pointing at the problems, and exchanging issues with the other stakeholders. So in order to do that, your first step will be to put together a file where you can combine all of those models and then find the issues and communicate them. So for today, we're going to run a little exercise where we're going to be combining those multiple files to, in our example, since we don't have yet an MAP or a services file, and our own architectural file. We're going to cover the topic of using dedicated coordination files. That particularly applies for the sake of Archicad on its own, since you will be tempted to use your own working file or the file that you use to produce your drawings to run coordination as well. Possible, I will say, at least from experience, not the cleanest solution, risky at times, and overall, I will say not as much recommended as having a proper dedicated file. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're also going to take a look at that with other tools other than Archicad. So actually, we're going to start with these other tools, because then what we want to do then is try to mimic some of those things back into Archicad. And then once we're back in the Archicad, we will show you just a couple of tools and tricks for visual coordination that we know can be done at this point in time. Mind you, this is part one. So some of the things that we're going to look at, things like clash detection and similar, we're not going to look at all of those today. So today we're going to focus on visual coordination first, and then we'll move into that in a future webinar. So that being that, let's jump into the files and take a look. Let's start with Solibri. So what we have on the screen right now is the combination of those two files we were working the last time. So that was revision 2 of the structural file and revision 3 of our architectural file, the one we use for federation of models. Not so much for integration. If you remember one of our previous webinars when we covered that topic, this one is also combining some of the architectural elements that may not be under the architect's scope. Okay, so getting into the subject, what we have done in here is, and you can recognize the building already there, is that we have combined the architectural version of our file with the structural version as it comes. So this is typical scenario, nothing new. A lot of you have seen this already. And what will happen is that the combination of these two files will bring the coordination task to your lab. So what do you do from here? Essentially, as we said, we're not going to run any rules. We're not going to run any smart tools with these coordination files. We're just going to do a visual coordination for now. So the way you do it in a tool like this is simply combine the two models by aggregating the two, right? And then you simply just walk around and mark up issues as you find them. right? In the case of Solibri, I'm going to show you, just to have another flavor of the same thing, we'll show you pretty much the same thing, but done with BIM Collab Zoom. So what we'll do with this, walk around with this. Let's go use this particular tool in here. And I'm going to start simply just going around, see what can you find just by going out visually. So for instance, one of the things I can tell right here is that this little canopy at the entrance actually have some issues. I can tell that this red cladding down there, it's actually not quite in the right place, or it might be that just the structural steel provided by the structural engineer is not quite in the right place since it's getting exposed. So finding things will be more of a visual task rather than anything else. And what you do from there, it's simply to provide some markups. Typically the markups in coordination, when you do coordination through IFC, they're based on three-dimensional or flat views where you simply point at the problems, you provide a markup, and then you send it to the specific or the relevant person. In the case of Solibri, that's easily done. Just go and use, and again, I'm using Solibri Anywhere, which is the free viewer, so you will be able to do the same thing if you download it. I'm going to use the Markup tool right there. I'll provide this sub palette in here, and that palette will allow me to do markups on top of the surfaces. In this particular case, since this is red, I'm probably going to change my color to a bluish color just to make sure that it's visible. All right, let's move around just to look for a better view on this. Now that that element is highlighted, I can simply point at it. Just going to draw, actually the arrow, I should have drawn it the other way around. Maybe do that and maybe add a note. Okay, I might be getting in a window, another screen, but okay, never mind. And probably add a little markup right there. Say that will be enough. With these tools, you can also provide a few. It seems that I may have a window on the background somewhere that I can't really see. So this is not going to keep working. So let me stop that. Do it again. Yeah, that's better. You can actually provide labels to this, where your tool will provide information about the element. In this particular case, it's calling up for the element in the RL, which might not be the best thing to do, but it is what we've got there. You can change that. You can essentially bring in whatever information you need to bring in. Let's say what we want to bring in is a type. So let's do it again. I'm just going to do the same thing. We'll have to stop it and do it again. Yeah, something like that. So you can provide markups there on the screen, and then we can save those and send it across. Now, let's not do all of that since we just have a limited amount of time, and we definitely would like to show you this back in Archicad. So if we jump to a similar process, but rather instead of using Solibri Anywhere, you want to use any other viewer, say BIM Collab Zoom. Let's jump into that. It will look relatively similar. Interface is pretty much the same as it is with most IFC viewers. And I have here on the left a model tree or a navigation tool for me to go through those different models. As you can tell, same thing. I have an architectural file and I have a structural file. Then from then on, it's a matter of simply looking for trouble in the same, pretty much the same way that we were doing it inside Solibri. Let's say you want to point out the same problem right there. You will use similar tools inside inside Zoom. In this particular case, you can draw lines, add clouds and little rectangles all over the place. So you can provide enough information for the elements to be checked, something like that. And let's add a few markups right there. And then simply save that view, send it across. Both Solibri Anywhere and BIM Collab Zoom, along with a bunch of other tools that I won't be able to show you just because of the time that will be consumed, just to show you all of them. They typically provide information about the elements, so you can tell simply by selecting them. You'll see where it comes from which file, so you will be able to tell if that's an architectural component or a structural one. Same with this, you can tell that right there, plus additional basic information as it was provided in the IFC. Similar thing will happen in here simply by selecting items. You'll see this window down here populated with the information that might be relevant for you to comment on those files. So we're in a webinar for tools in Archicad, so we just wanted to cover a few bits and pieces of how you will do it in here, but we actually want to go back to Archicad and do it right there. So let's take a moment and jump back to our Archicad file. Okay, so we're back to our dedicated Archicad file. And one of the things you will notice here is that although it looks pretty similar to my, if not the same actually, as my working file, this is a dedicated coordination file. And what I mean by that is that I started mimicking what I've done in Solibri and BIM Collab Zoom in order to combine different IFC files. So what you get is, if I check my hotlink module manager, what you will see is that I have two files in here, the architectural and the structural, as we were talking about, those in the previous software. So I actually have those two IFC files in this file and absolutely no content whatsoever, at least not at this stage, from the working file. So I'm mimicking what a typical coordination tool will do, which is linking in IFCs in order to start the coordination process and keep track of any coordination issues from now on. Now, how do you do that in Archicad? In Archicad, you have a few extra tools since you have the ability to look at things as if they were drawings, so orthogonal views. That's going to be an advantage of one of the things we want to look at. And the other thing that we want to look at is that since you're here, you're not only limited to the exchange of issues based on marked up 3D views. You can actually do it in a more classical or traditional drawing style. So we're going to go through those different little tools and tricks that you may want to use. So let's start by going to a plan view. And in here, you'll see nothing but the typical ground floor plan view of this project. In this particular case, I have only the architectural elements being displayed. I've got another view where I've got filtered all the other elements, so only structural elements are viewed. So only by starting with these few things, you will start to imagine that you have the ability to start doing things like trace and reference as simply by doing this. So let's do it again, show as a trace reference. Oh, sorry, I think I probably have made a mistake there. Okay, so what we'll do now is, instead of using the tracing reference, let's jump right ahead and start showing you some of the tools that are at your disposal here. One of them is to use graphic overrides. And let me show you an example first. I'm going to just jump into this view here. And this view already has a color-coded graphic override. And what I'm doing here, as you can tell basically by simply looking at it, is that I've made every architectural item in this file, so all the entities and elements coming from the architectural IFC file will be colored blue, while the ones coming from the structural file have been colored red. And that's something that you use or you do fairly easily with your graphic overrides. Let me show you some of that. So I'm just going to jump and click on the graphic overrides icon. I have one of them, the one that I have active. I've got it right there. And what I've created is a few rules for the override where I filter things by the layer in my particular case, since the dedicated translators that I'm using apply an extension to every one of them. So I don't need to know the layer itself. I just need to apply an extension to it. And the rest of it is just overriding fields and lines and surfaces. So I'll do one for the structural, so I can highlight that. And I'll do another one for the architectural. Same thing. Just making things consistent so that everything gets colored in blue. Everything else just managing fields, as you can see there. But the magic or the beauty of this is that because I'm doing that right on this view as a property of the view, I don't need to worry about things not being displayed for the sake of documentation. What I mean by that is the following. Imagine I want to coordinate this corner in here. And the one thing I can tell from that point right there is that the structural column is far bigger than the architect was expecting. So something needs to be managed at this point, and some things need to be commented at this in this area. For instance, you may want to point at the item that we're talking about. So maybe you add a label, and the label you can automatically make it display information about the, seems like I have duplicated that. There you go. Make it display information about the model. For instance, str is the hot link ID. So that is clearly a structural element. And then the ID of the element having at the end, what I know is the Revit ID number. So it will be for them fairly easy to locate the particular column if that's the only column that I need to highlight. So you can do things like that. You can simply just add dimensions. This is no different from doing any type of other commenting or highlighting or annotation of any view. The only thing that you actually want to do from then on is hopefully have a folder where you can start calling issues, right? And maybe add individual views for each. So call it columns discrepancy. Right? And then all of those can be then transferred into a set of documents. So let's do that first before we do a more or a smarter communication of issues using other tools. So you can simply go ahead, do that, have perhaps a series of drawings that you use for the purpose of coordination. Add that to that page, something like it. And you can keep doing the same, say, in other views. You can do that in a section, like so, where I have a section. And by the way, the section it's been overridden with the same graphic override. But one thing I've found to be very useful, which is having a series of sections already placed across the file, not only left to right the way I have it there, or not only one in between grid lines, although that's kind of my starting point. I also have them all across and in different scales and heights. I'm going to use these just to give an example, because that will be typically the way I want to section this building and the way I want to keep track of issues to start with. So we can go ahead and take a look at this particular view here, this section, and then within the section, knowing already that everything that is red is structural and everything that is blue is architectural, it will be fairly easy for you to pick points and double check and compare things. For instance, in this corner here, we have a slab that goes all the way across, and that might be a corner that we want to sort out. Or probably the differences in thickness in between these two slabs, assuming that one might be right, the other one might be wrong, or they may simply require coordination. The difference in height in the soffit of the structural element right there, and how these will be sorted out. So all of these items can be then reported for issues. So in the same sense that let's actually create another one here and point at this particular slab. There you go. Something like that, just to make it visible, and maybe highlight the difference in heights. It's not a lot, it's actually just a few. Let's put it there, 10 millimeters. I will do probably the same thing, which is save that view. And for the sake of documenting this in a classical paper-like way, I'll simply drop it right there. So what I'm doing there is creating a document that keeps track of certain issues for coordination. And in that way, you will be following what we will call a very classical coordination style of things, where you basically mimicking the old process of running transparencies or tracing documents on top of others. So same thing you'll do with a services file, no different than that. Now, if I wanted to start using better tools within Archicad, you may want to start going into your 3D window. So in the 3D window, you can also use your graphic overrides and different combination of those to do things like this. Take your architectural file, leave it as it is, and highlight any structural elements, with the hope that some of them will protrude like so, and some of them will make themselves visible to the plain eye. So you can very easily just go across the file and highlight which elements might not be quite well coordinated. That is another way of doing it here in 3D. Same as, let's go back to that, doing the same thing, but instead of having your architectural elements as they are, you can turn them simply to wireframe. If you don't know how that trick is done, it's simply a feature of your layers where you can simply click on this option here in the center, that little box, and that will turn those layers into wireframe. So that will take this effect, and as you can imagine, this will give you the option to see through things and maybe pinpoint or highlight or find issues that you may want to call the attention to. So same with the other thing, you can also save a view of this if you think that that is relevant, and highlight it and point it in a particular drawing. One of the things that is very useful when you're using a 3D window like this will be the use of section planes, because they can reduce the amount of the scoped area to just a particular point in the file. Just take that one here and point it there. Let's create another one. There you go. So you can just go do that and look at the model in a cut way that might be better depending on what are you looking at. You can do the same thing vertically just as well. So you can do that with a wireframe, or probably my preferred way of doing this will be simply using a graphic override when I will ghost the elements that I want to see through. That adds a little bit more of solidity to the elements that are supposed to be embedding other elements. So this is another way of doing it, and actually one that might be explaining some of the issues a little bit better. Then the next way of doing this bit will be simply to add either a section box, put it in a 3D document, put it in this simple view, like so. I can call it canopy issues. Create that, and just in the same way, layout view, there you go. And pretty much in the same way that we were using those sections and elevations, I can use this to point at a particular problem in a very classical way. Right? So you have plan views, section views, or 3D views on a piece of paper that you can trace from then on in order to run a coordination. Let's go back to our 3D view. And like so, you'll do it in, say, let's call it a classical way. Now, what we want to show you in the next webinar is the next step from here. Now, I'm still using 23. I'm hoping I'll migrate to 24 soon so that I can show you the same process, but using the newer tools in 24. And in there, what we have is a series of markups. This markup tool is now called issues, and it's exactly the tool that you want to use to find and keep track of these particular coordination issues. So when I use that the next time, I want to start looking at some of the tools inside Archicad that will help you with the actual coordination, like collision detection and a few other tools down here. Okay, so that finalizes our webinar of the day. Please subscribe to any future webinars by pointing your camera at that QR code on the screen. This will take you to a calendar where you can then move and register to get any newsletters from the next webinars. For any technical support, please give us a call for anything that is urgent to the 1-300-873-246. Not urgent items, and just to look at what other content we have, please log into myci@centralinnovation.com or send us an email to any of the support emails both in Australia and New Zealand. Don't forget to register to all the extra content we have on MyCI at centralinnovation.com. And stay tuned for next week's webinar of the series. See you next Tuesday.